What's up guys, Alex from FIFA Scouting Tips here and welcome to my FIFA 17 scouting guide. Now today I'm going to be looking at player types because when you hire a scout and send them to a country, you've got to choose from one of these player types down here. So what does that mean? What do each of these player types get you? What type of players do they result in? That's what I'm going to be looking at today, so let's get started. So here we have attacker player type. Now this can come in a couple of different varieties really. You have wide players like these, midfielders and wingers, and you can also get central midfielders and central attacking midfielders. So what are these players like? Well, with wingers, quite often their pace is some of their best physical stats, and in terms of technical stats, their finishing, their shooting, shot power, long shots, that kind of stuff is usually the best stuff. So they're basically wide strikers rather than actual wingers. Dribbling is a little bit behind, so they're better if you sort of shift them inside a bit and play them as striker. It's the same with this guy here. His finishing is his best stat. Quite often you can find quite fast ones like this one here, 77 acceleration and 74 sprint speed, so they're pretty useful players to have on the wing. If you did want to play them there, you just need to train their dribbling a bit. Now you can also find attacking midfielders like this player here, and with them their technical stats are a bit closer, so the dribbling and ball control is not very far behind finishing at all. It's not as imbalanced as it was with wingers. They can also have quite good physical stats as well in terms of their speed, so they're quite good to play on the wing if you want to. Now the final one I'm going to look at is central midfielders. Now, although this guy isn't that fast, his acceleration and sprint speed are still his best physical stats, so as he grows, that will get better and better. In terms of his technical stats, they're like the other players. The finishing, the shot power, the volleys, they're his best technical stats. So once again, he is a mispositioned striker, but I wouldn't recommend playing him at central midfield because it's going to take a lot of effort to train his stats up, like his tackling and his passing. Those stats that you need as central midfielders, it's going to take a while to train that up because he's rated 42 and it's going to take a long time for him to reach his potential, so it's probably not worth keeping hold of central midfielder attackers. Just stick to the wingers and the attacking midfielders. Now there is one obvious omission. Once again, you can't seem to find strikers, actual strikers, when you look for attacker. It seems really weird. I did cover this in another video, so make sure you check that out for a bit more detail. But if you're looking for strikers, you're going to want to search for technically gifted or physically strong players, not attacker. For some reason, you just can't find them with attacker. Next we have defensive minded. This can come in three types: central midfield, defensive midfield and fullback. And like attacker, there is a glaring omission, and that is that you can't find defensive minded centre backs for some reason. It was the case last year in FIFA 16 and it's still the case now. So that's a bit frustrating. If you want to find centre backs, you should try looking for physically strong players. But anyway, with defensive minded, these are different types of players. You can get central midfielders, and generally speaking it's not a great idea to get these ones because their physical stats, they're okay, they're not great. Their technical stats though, they're not particularly great. They are mispositioned players. Again, they're more like defensive midfielders, so their stand tackle is pretty good, their passing, their shot power, they're some of the better stats they've got, but because they're mispositioned they get a lot of red stats and they get a low overall. So although he has high potential, he's only rated 45, so it's probably not a good idea to get a defensive minded central midfielder. You'll want a defensive midfielder like this guy here. His rating is much better. His physical stats, once again, fairly average. That seems to be the case with all defensive minded players. Their physical stats are not particularly great, but his technical stats, pretty good for his overall. He's got good passing, good tackling, good marking, good ball control, so he's a pretty good all-round central midfielder there, quite a useful player to have in the middle of the pitch. So they're good players if you want good technical players, but not so great on the physical side. And now the last one is fullback. So once again, their physical stats aren't particularly great, they're okay, but hopefully they'll grow a bit in due course, but they're not amazing to start out with. Now interestingly, sometimes their passing, in this guy's case, is better than their tackling. So his short passing is 61, but his stand tackle is 51. So that's not particularly great for a fullback, but his crossing's okay and his slide tackle isn't bad either. And with this fullback, it's not always the case, so his tackling is pretty good with this guy. His heading is also quite good as well, so they're quite good at a few different things in terms of technical stats when you get fullbacks. Once again, this guy's physical stats though are not particularly great. So defensive minded players, probably best if you're looking for a defensive midfielder, because central midfielders and fullbacks, they have a few drawbacks. Now for goalkeepers, the good news is that on your scouting reports you will only be given goalkeepers. When you search for other player types, sometimes you get goalkeepers mixed in there, but it doesn't work the other way around. You'll only get goalkeepers, so you can just concentrate on the players that you want to find. Now with goalkeepers, usually in terms of their stats, the positioning is worse than the other stats. I'm not sure why that is, but it is usually the case. Sometimes you get it within a couple of points of the other stats, like here it's only a couple of points behind diving, but really they're not that well balanced. You do usually end up with players with positioning worse than their other stats. You do sometimes get players like this with one stat that's way better than the other stats as well. So it's worth looking out for those exceptional stats in there. But the good thing about goalkeepers is you can really train them quite well, and they can grow very, very quickly. Especially if they've got high potential, they're likely to grow rapidly. So it's absolutely worth looking for goalkeepers. Even if you don't want one in your team, you can just scout one, train him up, and then sell him on for a good profit. Next we have physically strong. Now you can basically find physically strong players in any central outfield position on the pitch. So centre back, defensive midfield, central midfield, centre forward, attacking midfield and striker, as well as at fullback. Now let's take a look at the different positions. So with all players who are physically strong, you get really good physical stats, as you'd expect. They're strong, but they're also pretty fast and good in the air as well. So with this striker, he's got 77 strength and 73 sprint speed. So that's pretty useful really, and that will grow as he continues to develop. In terms of his technical stats, his heading, his shot power and his long shots are his best stats. So that's pretty good going forward. Interestingly, with physically strong players, their defensive stats are also quite good. Like his tackling is only just behind his shooting. And unfortunately, with physically strong strikers, often the finishing is not that great, so you'll need to train that up. But everything else should be pretty good. With centre forwards, it's the same sort of story. Heading accuracy and dribbling are pretty good, same with long shots, but his stand tackling is as well. And his physical stats are all nicely balanced, all quite good. Now earlier I said you can't find defensive minded centre backs, but you can find physically strong ones, and they are pretty good. Once again, that balance of strength and speed is going to be very useful in centre back with defending against attackers, and his technical stats are all pretty nice as well. Once again, same with strikers, the tackling is pretty much as good as the shooting or the shot power. So it's interesting that you could pretty much play them either at centre back or up front, and they'd be pretty good in both positions. Now with midfielders, unfortunately this guy, his overall isn't that great, so it's kind of hard to see, but his physical stats, once again, very nice. His in terms of his technical stats, his tackling is pretty much his best attribute in there, and the same sort of thing with the central midfielder. Tackling being the best stat, short passing, shot power, long shots, all pretty good as well, and some nice physical stats on top of that. And then finally we have fullbacks. Now these ones are really good to use because that is another position where that pace and strength is very, very useful, both in attack and in defence. And it's the same sort of story with the technical stats once again, tackling and shooting being their best attributes. So that seems to be a common thing across all physically strong players. Their tackling and their shooting is pretty much even. So think of that as you will. They can be used in a variety of different positions, but really it's the physical stats which make them stand out. Now we're going to take a look at playmakers. Now, as with physically strong, you get quite a lot of variety in the positions that you'll find with this player type, but the most common position you'll get is central midfield. Now there are two different types of playmaker, like central midfielders, that you'll find. Now both of them, the physical stats are not particularly great, just be aware of that. In terms of the technical stats, you'll get two different types. So you've got this one here, who his best stats are his long passing, his short passing, his long shots, and his curve. He's kind of, everything else is a little bit balanced though. Those are the best stats, but everything else isn't too far behind. Whereas you have the other type, which is the type who basically specialises in free kicks. So his free kick accuracy and his curve are his best two technical stats. Everything else, again, isn't too far behind, but unlike this guy who was specialising in shooting and long passing, this guy is specialising in free kicks. So that's the two different types of central midfielder you'll get with Playmaker. It's also the same with attacking midfielders. So this guy, he's got his curve as his best stat and his free kick accuracy isn't too far behind. Then further down you have this one who is a bit more balanced. This one's physical stats again aren't that great, but this one, his pace is a little bit better, so it could be that he develops into a bit of a faster player. So those are the two types you'll get with central players. With wingers, you can get playmakers, but they're not that great. He isn't particularly fast, his acceleration isn't too bad, but his sprint speed is only 58 and his stamina is way too low. In terms of his technical stats, his passing and his curve are his best two stats, so he's not really a winger, he's more of a mispositioned central midfielder, so you don't really want wide playmakers. The same goes for centre backs. Now obviously these are completely out of position. You don't want playmaker at centre back, and he's got 50 strength and 43 jumping, so that's not very good for a centre back. His technical stats are okay. He's more geared towards free kicks, as like that other player we had, and his crossing isn't too bad either, but his tackling stats, only 40 stand tackle and 39 slide tackle. You do not want a playmaker at centre back. And then the final one is at fullback, and once again this is another player aimed at taking free kicks. His technical stats aren't actually that bad, but they're not very good for a fullback. Once again, 41 slide tackle, 42 stand tackle and 42 marking is not very useful. He's not very fast either and hasn't got very good stamina. So if you want to find a playmaker, the best positions to find them at are at central midfield and attacking midfield. Okay, up next is technically gifted. Now I spoke earlier about how you can't find strikers if you look for attacker, but one of the things you can do to find strikers is look for technically gifted players, and we've got two here. Now there seem to be two different types of strikers. So we look at the first one here. He's not particularly fast in terms of his physical stats. His agility is pretty good though, but in terms of his technical stats, his dribbling and his ball control are pretty good. They're rated 70. Unfortunately his finishing is pretty poor though, it's not very good at all. Same with his shot power and long shots, they're not great. So really he's more of a wide player or an attacking midfielder than a striker. Now with the other player, it's kind of a similar story. His dribbling isn't as good, but his pace is better. 73 acceleration, 71 balance, very useful. Stamina not great, but hopefully that can improve over time. So if you're looking for technically gifted strikers, be warned that they are more of attacking midfielders and wingers, but you can make them into strikers if you train them up a bit. Now the next type of technically gifted player we have is the wide player. Now in terms of his technical stats, ball control and curve, fantastic, really high rated. His dribbling is also pretty good, and his passing is one of his better stats as well. Physical stats though, he's not particularly fast, high 60s in terms of sprint speed and acceleration, but hopefully that will grow with a bit of development. We know that physical stats can grow pretty good this year in FIFA 17, so they could be a useful option if you want someone who's got very good technical stats straight out the box. Now you get attacking midfielders and central midfielders as well, and they're fairly similar to wide players but in a more central position. So again, pace is okay. This guy's got good acceleration for one thing, and their technical stats geared towards ball control, dribbling and curve. They're very strong in those areas. So same with wide players, just in a different position, but curve, ball control and dribbling, the main attributes. Now as a final note, you can get technically gifted defensive midfielders, and if you just look at the stats here, dribbling and ball control is pretty good, and their pace is good as well, but they're not very good as defensive midfielders because they're not very strong and they haven't got very good tackling, like 28 stand tackle, 26 marking. That's not going to be useful at defensive midfield. So if you want technically gifted players, stick to wide players and central midfielders, and perhaps strikers if you're willing to train them. The final player type you can scout is winger, and as you can see as I scroll through all these players, they are all pretty fast. It's very easy to find fast players if you look for winger, which is great because there are some player types where you get wide players and they're not particularly fast at all. That's not the case with winger. So you can get winger strikers. Like I said before, you can't get attacker strikers, so this is one way to get strikers instead. They are pacey, 81 acceleration is really, really good. In terms of the technical stats though, no matter whether you get a striker or a centre forward, unfortunately their crossing is better than their finishing. It's a bit frustrating. The long shots aren't bad, the shot power is okay, but the crossing is better than finishing, so you will need to train them to get that finishing stat up. But they have got good pace, so if you're looking for a direct, pacey striker, this is a good player type to look for. Now obviously you also get wingers out on the wings, and they are very fast as well, and as with strikers you get good crossing, good dribbling and good long shots. So it's the same sort of technical stats across the different positions, you just get more specialisation in dribbling and crossing than in finishing. Now even with very low rated players like this one, he's only rated 46, you can still get fast players. He's still got acceleration 77, so it's very useful if you just want an impact player. You're not likely to use him really, because of his low overall, but it's just useful to know that you can still find pacey players. Now, the other thing I want to say is that with some players, you get good acceleration, but low sprint speed. It's a bit annoying. So this one here has got 80 acceleration, but 65 sprint speed. So that's a bit annoying, but his sprint speed should grow over time. It's just a bit frustrating to see. So like I said, you'll get very, very quick players with wingers. Just watch out for that low finishing if you want to find strikers. So that's it for my in-depth look at the different types of players that you can scout in FIFA 17. Hopefully it's helped you decide what you should look for in your team. Stay tuned for more scouting guide content, and make sure you check out my other FIFA 17 content on this channel and on my website, which is fifascoutingtips.com. Got loads of useful guides and things up on there. If there's anything you want me to do in FIFA 17, any other guides or career mode stuff, anything like that, just let me know in the comments below. You can also tweet me at FIFA Scouting on Twitter, or message me on Facebook at facebook.com/FIFAScoutingTips. So please leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching. As with Technically Gifted, you have a much better chance of finding strikers with Physically Strong than with Attacker. But as with Technically Gifted, there's a problem.